Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to ISCM's first virtual Gulf Town Hall series. And the theme for today is aligning supply and demand in the new normal. And I would also like to thank our strategic partners, Pedersen and partners. As an institution, we are into education, training, research, and consulting. And we also have our Demand Planning Academy, where we offer professional and certification courses in the domain. We would be sharing you the details post email, and we would also request you to visit our website www.demandplanningacademy.com. Setting the ground rules for the day. This platform is on listen only mode, and I would request all attendees to write in and post your questions. We would answer the same post the panel is over. Moving ahead, I would like to introduce you to the speakers for the day. We have Anand Doraiswamy, Head Supply Chain, Dabur. Kunal Gupta, Director Supply Chain, Bateel. Raphael Hallenbarter, Corporate Supply Chain Director, Transmed. George Kurian, VP, Director Supply Chain and Logistics, Michelin. Srinivasan Palani, Head Supply Chain, Fashion Vertical, Al-Futtaim Group. Guillaume Akbaraly as an supply chain expert, and Dr. Rakesh Singh, Chairman, Institute of Supply Chain Management. Once again, we welcome you all, and I request Dr. Rakesh Singh to come up on the stage and lead the discussion. I would also request all the other panelists to join him on stage. Thank you.
I think Dr. Singh, you're mute. You're on mute.
Sorry. Welcome to the first ISCM virtual town hall in the Gulf region. We have selected a topic called aligning supply and demand in the new normal, the future of supply chain planning, because I think this is one of the most important elements of supply chain management today. Amidst the uncertainty that persists today, has really, become the most dynamic element and also defied all the rules of a deterministic supply chain that we used to have earlier. Given the pandemic, how it erupted in China, affecting supplies from China, and it has moved beyond China to become a global pandemic, affecting more than 197, 198 countries in the world. It started probably as a single source base called China as a supply shock for most economies in the world, but has become a supply shock from the rest of the world, as also as a demand shock from the rest of the world. And I think this is a little different than any other pandemic, any other disruption or natural disasters like earthquake, tsunami, primarily because their domains have been very less than what we see during the pandemic. And also their spread has been, very, very less. It is time bound. You come out of it, you have a business continuity plan. This business continuity plans helps you to move out of a disaster in a certain manner. The world economy and businesses across the globe have learned to deal with hurricanes and droughts and disasters and floods. But this one is little different. It is more like all of them, plus it is having a huge, cash crunch issues, financial issues like the 2008 financial crisis, and it is also a health crisis, and hence it affects not only the businesses, not only the livelihoods, but it also affects lives in a big way. So all larger crises, economic crises have had impact on lives, but nothing of this kind has been seen in the recent past. So we thought we get experts from supply chain, as you see the panel here, who dwell with the questions of synchronizing demand and planning in future. But we'll also go through what has been happening in the last, 2 months under the lockdowns, where the whole of the world economy has been locked down. Dubai is a very special economy. I was looking at the data and I found that it is largely a retail economy. It's a trading hub, a re-export hub of prominence to Middle East, Africa, and also to the Mediterranean region. And it has a very significant trade composition. And I think it is like Dubai, the number of nationalities in Dubai also represent the number of countries that Dubai deals with in a very dynamic way for its import as well as export. And we do not see Dubai as something like other economies where single sourcing base has been China, though China has a significant part, not to say that. So my first question would definitely be on supply chain shock and the short-term and long-term impact of COVID-19 on supply chain planning. I think I will start with George. And George, can you take us through the dynamics of shocks on the supply side that you faced during the length of this pandemic, to start with?
George. So, good morning to you, and thank you for this opportunity, Rakesh. So, if you were to look at this crisis, and it probably panned out around starting 2 months ago, most businesses were looking at projecting the next 3 to 4 months and managing their supply, depending on where you're looking at, either through local sourcing or through global sourcing. And one of the biggest short-term impacts was how to deal with a sharp downturn in demand. And that was the first question. How do you ensure that, depending on whether you have a local or a global supply chain, you ensure that those figures are clearly shared upstream, so that at least you're able to manage the sharp downturn in demand. The next question that came in immediately after that is, what about the future, and how do I survive right now? And when we are talking about how do we survive right now, it's more around managing your cash, because most businesses today are looking at managing their free cash flow, because that's what they need for their day-to-day operations. And if your sales tank 20, 30, 40, 50%, the amount of stock that you're carrying, especially on a long lead time supply chain, could pretty much potentially kill the finances and the free cash flow of your company. So that was the next question that we probably needed to address. And then the third question coming out of the crisis, which could be different in different parts of the world, would be what would the future look like? And that's what we are going to discuss around this seminar today. So those are the three questions that we had to address on the supply chain front, given the shock and given the quantum of the shock, because it was different in different markets, and given the scope of what I'm working on, which is Africa, India, and the Middle East, the quantum of the shock, the scope of the shock, and probably the recovery would look very different depending on the countries we're talking about. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It clearly gives us an opportunity to work much more closely with the business, much more closely with our sales teams, to predict the future, because there is no model that can predict that would fit all sizes.
Can you give us a little understanding of your sourcing from the globe market and how the sourcing was impacted during the length of this lockdowns in Dubai?
Yeah, so let me take the example of the Middle East. Typically, at least for our company, we do not have production facilities, which would pretty much mean that we produce worldwide and import into Dubai or the Middle East. So that would mean lead times of closely at least 3 months, and with a stock on hand of between 2 to 3 months here, depending on the kind of products we are selling. So when you have this kind of demand drop, let's say 40, 50, 60% on the retail market, the stock that you have, which covered 3 months of sales, is suddenly going to cover 6 months of sales. And then you have your factories who purchased their raw materials, purchased all that you need to take for this long lead time supply chain upfront in the different markets that we operate, that needed also to be adjusted immediately. So there were actions coming in from purchasing of raw materials up until what do we do getting out of this crisis to make sure we get back on track in terms of sales. And it's very different actions, very different decisions. But more importantly, there are decisions always taken with an hypothesis coming from the business and coming from the sales teams, because no one has any reference. So there's clearly a lot of information with a lot of heads that we need to put together to manage this. And maybe the indicators that we used to use previously are not the same indicators that we need to use as we get out of this crisis. Maybe much more short-term indicators versus longer-term ones could be helpful. A lot of things around analytics, a lot of things around footfalls around in retail would help clearly understand how we can manage and accompany the upturn with the minimum cost. I think that's the key for most of the businesses we are working.
Thank you, George. Anand, you had the supply chain planning. Let me correct that, what Jaisal said. And so that you're not in trouble, go back. Can you let me know the kind of supply chain shock? George brought about the broader dimensions of supply chain and demand planning issue. Can you take us into the supply chain shock issue and tell us how did you all manage to manage what were the issues of the whole process?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dr. Singh, for inviting me for this webinar to start with. So when the pandemic started, so there was a huge rush of people going to the retail first and pick up whatever is available. The first shock was the consumer was not looking into any brand as such. The company was looking at the availability of the product on the shelf. So from the supply side, obviously the shock got back to us, saying that how fast we can deliver those products, whatever is available in your inventory, to the shelf. So the forward supply chain was a big challenge when the pandemic actually started. Coming to the back-end supply chain, what happened was, because of the supply chains getting shut all across the world, we had to cover up the inventory for the longer lead time items. Now, unlike what Mr. George was mentioning, that it's an import model for a company like Michelin, for a company like Dabur, we have a production facility in Dubai. So we have to manage the sourcing of raw and packing material into the factory in Dubai, which is largely imported from raw material perspective, and from packing material perspective is local. So the strategy that we implemented in the company was to have lean inventory for the shorter lead times, which means that all the pack materials were on a call basis and was on a very weekly basis, so as to maintain the cash flows. And in case of the longer lead time items, which was mainly the raw materials coming from Europe, coming from Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on, we had to build up inventories. But at the same time, we had these business partners in the globe who have been with us for so long, and hence it's a mutual understanding that in order to maintain cash flows, we had to increase the credit period with the vendors, which was a good strategy to go with. And in the past, as when there was a price increase requested by the vendor, and we as a customer have agreed to it. At the same time, now being tough times for both of us, the vendor also came back and supported us in the period, and we could actually manage the cash flows. So that's how it actually helped the FMCG world in the MENA region from the supply side. That was short term. Coming to the long-term perspective, what we see in the near future is that the consumer behavior has drastically changed, and the consumer behavior has changed from going to a retail mall or going to a mom and pop store which is down the house. It's all online today. So the e-commerce is really picking up, and that's where the next strategy from supply side comes into place. So how is e-commerce going to help us? So that's something with, you have promo packs, you have combo packs, you have kits, which gives a complete immunity booster, which gives a complete, product offering. So let's say in case of essential product, FMCG essential product category.
Anand, we'll come back to that a little later. We'll come back that buying behavior and demand side a little later.
Yeah.
You come from a pharma background. Sourcing must be from China. What is your view? What is your view on supply chain shocks, and how do pharma companies in UAE manage their supply chain shock, and how did they manage their disruption in their supply during the period of these 40 days?
So what happened was, one of the biggest benefit for the China sourcing happened during this period was also from the month of February to Jan 15 to Feb 20th. There is a period of Chinese New Year which shuts the entire China for sourcing. So generally, as normal supply chains, what we do as an organization is we build inventory before the Chinese New Year gets into place. So
Right, thank you very much. Let's go to Guillaume now. We'll come back to you later.
Sure.
Guillaume.
Yeah. So actually, as Anand was started to mention, since the epidemic outbreak. Yeah, can you hear me better?
Yeah, no, it's better.
Yeah. Okay. So since the epidemic outbreak started during almost the Chinese New Year, so we were anyway prepared for the Chinese New Year period, for which we know that it's going to be closed for a month one and plus 1 week. So we were ready for that time. Now what happened is that after once they started to resume, meaning the Chinese factory started to resume, and they were under many of them were under lockdown, under reduced staffing under their factory. So what happened is that even if you have because we have a source in China, but we had source also in India, in different other countries. But what happened is that it increases the load of other suppliers, because for some material, meaning you might have like 5, 6, 7 suppliers in the world who are supplying this type of raw material. And when you have a country which is decreasing their capacity, obviously people are going back to other suppliers, which is they are increasing their load, and they become constrained, not because at that time they are not able to, meaning there was a lockdown situation or a slowdown in production, but because they had a lot of demand coming from people who used to buy from China. So then their constraints become our constraints. So meaning the increase of lead time and also increase of pricing of raw material, because obviously, meaning when you start to face short on some raw material, then the pricing become a huge impact. So definitely, meaning your cost of material is increasing, your gross margin is being impacted. So it's meaning this is the kind of impact that we saw in the beginning of the crisis. Then obviously, with all the different countries taking the different step to slowing down the movement of people, to reducing the number of people going at work and so on, then we started to face the decrease of capacity everywhere. So it became an issue, because for something which lead time was relatively short, then it become longer. So obviously, meaning initially you have not much anticipated in terms of safety stock and so on, because this is material that you have on a relatively short lead time, and then when the lead time is multiplied by 2 or 3, almost from 1 week to another, meaning. So then it become more like how you handle your procurement strategy with your supplier, meaning how you develop the relation with your supplier, so that you are ahead of other of the list in their list of customers, so you can be yes.
In terms of sourcing and supply management, what is the bigger risk? Because even if you know the first tier supplier, the biggest challenge that most organizations face is that they do not know the deep tier supplier structure, and that becomes a very strong sourcing risk, for the companies, not only in immediate period, but also in the long run during such pandemic and such disruption. So do you think that that's the kind of thing that most pharma companies have faced in the UAE?
Actually, yeah, because what's happening, I will tell you an example. So take a practical example. You take a molecule which is amoxicillin, for example, which is a widely used molecule in the world, penicillin, antibiotics widely used. You have lot of API manufacturing, especially for generic company, which is between China and India. Okay, now China started to stop because they started to lock down and to slow down the activity. So all the load went to India. But then it's interesting to know, as you said, how is the different how the chain of this API works, because this API, their raw material, which is called intermediate, 70% of the intermediate is coming from China. So it doesn't matter, even if India can manufacture, but at the end, the raw material is coming also from China. Then if China is impacted, everyone will be impacted down the line. So, so you face the same situation. It's not like meaning it's totally independent, or country are working totally independently. So, and this is where there have been some studies showing that usually, meaning your tier one supplier, you have a visibility of 70% of what's happening, but on the tier two supplier, you don't know what's happening. Maybe sometimes you're not even aware of what is their sourcing strategy, how they are working, and this is where this is then in this type of situation where you face where you face the wall and you say, okay, now what? Because okay, I thought, meaning people say, okay, we thought we were smart, so we are shifting with alternate supplier. But this alternate supplier, actually their raw material is coming also from the same place. So it's not really a shift. In this time of situation, you're still facing the same issue. So this is where, meaning knowing really deeply how the sourcing strategy, how the capacity constraint of your supplier is, so that accordingly you're adapting also your planning, your sourcing strategy, or your sourcing strategy is definitely
Thank you, Palani. I think I'll just go quickly to two more contributors who can contribute a little more to this discussion. I'll go to Raphael Hallenbarter. Raphael comes from Transmed. Raphael, what is your view on supply chain risk during the pandemic? Maybe from a Transmed perspective as well as from a generic perspective.
Okay, good morning. I think the risk as general, we can identify very quickly, as this was a disruption in supply and replenishment, right? And for Transmed, I think as we are an FMCG distributor, we have products, so our portfolio is in the non-food area and in the food area. So we had both upsurge of orders in the same moment, as we have certain products that not were very asked in the same time. So we had the conflict of both. So we did very quick an assessment very early to understand risk and opportunity for our portfolio. And accordingly to this, we needed to adjust our forecast and our sources if possible. The critical part here as well, if we look at our portfolio, our products have a best before date, right? So this gives another risk, this gives another flavor in the whole complexity here. And how did we manage this? I think, number one, we always were very aware as an organization and as a company that the products we supply to the market, it's a duty. And these times, people were looking for sanitizers, right? This would be a very not good for the environment in Dubai or in the area if sanitizer would have been out in such a moment of time. So it was not just supplying, it was a duty as an organization, a supply chain, to serve the entire community. And this we were very aware, and accordingly to this, we adjusted our forecasting. We spoke very early to our suppliers to understand the risks on their side, and we amended our forecasting accordingly. So, but if you ask how you mitigate this risk, I think there was no logic, there was no algorithm, as this was the first time. It was people speaking to each other, connecting, understanding, and estimating what happens next. And it was a day-to-day or week-to-week decision.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Raphael. Kunal, your supply sourcing is very, very different. What kind of problem that you faced? Did you ever face a problem on the supply side?
Yes, hi. Good morning to everyone and good afternoon to people, Dr. Yu and people in India. So yeah, I mean, I think we have about half the panel today also dealing with food. Unlike me, I mean, Raphael and Anand touched upon a couple of the challenges we all faced. So I think we have a major sourcing from food perspective, all from Europe. I think pretty much like Transmed, they heavily depend on US and Europe. So that kind of, so when this whole thing started and all our packaging is from mostly from China. So when the during Chinese New Year, we are all waiting for China to open, and like Guillaume mentioned, that we were all prepared for that 1 month of disruption, which we never knew will continue for another 4 months. So that it started from there, and then we thought at least the food side is safe, only to realize that then the next was Italy and then next was France, which are all our hubs for importation. So it was quite a challenge from a disruption point of view, but at the same time, again, I think George mentioned, you generally UAE supply chains and specifically food, this country imports 90% of the food as from outside. So everybody's supply chain is well equipped to have at least 3 months of stock, 3 to 4 months of stock, and another 2 to 3 months in pipeline. So with this, with this kind of at least a 3-month supply, which automatically then becomes 6, 8, 9 months, yeah, because of the drop in demand. So yes, there is this disruption in supply big time, but then your sustainability of existing supply also is increased. I mean, of course, the other side of the spectrum is like what Raphael mentioned. With food, it's like a ticking time bomb because we all have an expiry date, which means that your 3 months, unlike probably, yeah, even for that matter, I think George has tires also have the dates, no, for manufacturing. So ultimately, even a tire cannot be used forever for 5 years. So I think all the products, and I'm sure with Srini, it's also fashion. I mean, I don't know how people fussy are now at this point of time, but all these challenges are the other side of spectrum, where today we don't have a challenge because suddenly from a supply issue we have overstocking, but 3 months from now, that's what is going to hit us then. Now what do we do with the stocks? So it's kind of, it balances out in a way that if it is not today, it's not a supply issue, but tomorrow it will become a supply issue as well as it will become an overstock issue. So it's a very unique challenge we're facing, to be honest, at this point of time.
Absolutely agreed. It's the bullwhip effect. We need to be very careful now. So this will come. This is just a question of time.
Yeah.
We need to now to think about how we mitigate and what's the action accordingly in the pipeline.
Correct.
To mitigate as good as possible.
In short term, we are all doing crisis management, which is what this whole situation is. Today, we are only thinking about obviously managing now and absolutely taking care of today. I mean, with such a short visibility and everybody is thinking, what do we do today? And like he said, we are looking at sanitizers, we are looking at what is required now. But we also have to, at the same time, specifically as supply chain specialists and experts, we have to have that visibility that all these products, what will happen in 4 months, 6 months, 12 months. So I'm sure that as much as we are talking about how we managing now, we are more worried about what is going to hit us in October, November, December in the 4th quarter, when especially all the food guys are in trouble because everything is sitting from January, which we thought we have enough food, but by December we know that we cannot do much about it. So I think we have more challenges to come, our way now as we go along.
Thank you, Kunal. I think during this period of time, it's just the business continuity plan in the near term, and near term is very, very near. And
exactly.
Right. It's more of a business continuity that you have, and I think experiences during the business continuity can have this thing. But I want to go back to George quickly. George, as China is looking robust, but are your supplies looking robust also? Can you you are mute? Unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now, Rakesh?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so yes, I think in terms of robustness of the supply chain, we need to break it up into 2 parts, like Kunal mentioned. The first one is in the short term, are you capable of responding to customer need and probably sometimes changing customer needs? And I'll just give an example. Even during the peak of the crisis, as a company, we were focusing on how do we deliver tires for ambulances? How do we deliver tires for aircraft? Because we said that passenger car or aircrafts were on the ground, but guess what? Cargo planes were across all the skies. How do we deliver to some militaries around the world and even in this region that were ensuring supplies to for the citizens through the food network? So yes, there was the supply chain was probably working on different levers based on whether it was a B2B or a B2C business. Now, in terms of the robustness of the supply chain, like Kunal mentioned, there are two parts. There is, can you respond to the changing need at the moment? And the second question is, what do we need to do to prepare for the future, which is uncertain? And there's an element of risk. And that's where clearly the way we are engaging internally with our teams is very different, because the decisions that are taken are not only supply chain decisions, they are business decisions. So for example, as the head of the region, I tell him, if we take this decision, this is the impact on our free cash flow. Are we comfortable with the sales? We really go much, much deeper with the sales teams by segment, saying, is this what you see on your market? And that's how we prepare a little bit more the future. Now, coming back to the other point which Anand had, which was on the upstream supply chain, we are also engaging with many of our tier 1, tier 2, and sometimes tier 3 suppliers that are critical for us to ensure that we can manage the long term, because the short term is going to be managed with stock. So yes, in a nutshell, we are prepared. Where there is probably a large amount of uncertainties how the market will pan out in terms of demand, because like Raphael mentioned, there is no reference. You always say, you have statistical models, etc. Today, there is no statistical model. China is probably having an upsurge in demand now after a lockdown of 3 months internally within the country. But that cannot be copy-pasted to Dubai or to India or to Africa. And that's where clearly this is an opportunity for people in supply chain to really get into business, understand the nitty-gritty of it, and be the partners in decision making with your CEO. Because if we get the wrong decision on supply chain, it will pretty much mean making or breaking your business for the next 6 months. And Kunal was mentioning Q4, but I would think that would also go into 2021, because a lot of preparation goes in 2020 for 2021. So yes, in a nutshell, we are prepared. There are some levers that we need to look at with a clear demarcation on the short term and the slightly longer term.
Right, George, there's one more query that I have with you is that if you look at the geography of your sourcing, can you tell us how it has impacted quickly in a 1 minute framework? Because given Michelin sourcing geography itself, there are some dynamics that must have emerged in the process of managing your supplies.
That's correct. So we pretty much source from across the globe. So for the Middle East, we source from Europe, from North America, from East Asia, Thailand, and a little bit from China, but not much given the high performance tires that we sell in the region. And guess what? The sourcing is also impacted by what happened in Europe, North America, and Southeast Asia, with very different impacts. So Asia came back pretty much strongly, very, very fast. Europe took a little more longer time to come in back into production and back into supplies. And North America is actually still coming back on board. So the question we are always asking ourselves is, now given this sourcing, what is priority for us? What are the key products we need to make sure we have in stock and all these steps in H2? And that's again some work that we are doing with these sales teams that eventually roll up into our forecast with different priorities to ensure that at least we get what is absolutely required versus what we think is a nice to have or is not part of the marketing priority number 1.
All right. Thank you, George. I think that puts the debate in a better perspective. I think all of us who stay out of Dubai think that China is the only source of it. Given the global trading hub nature of Dubai, I think sourcing here can be affected in a very, very different way. And as Kunal and George and even Anand said, it is very clear that the length and the direction and the geography of the pandemic has affected the supply chain availability, and also the risk that it has created is very dynamic. Because in the Jaws case, it is from China, move into suddenly, and you see that there is a huge sourcing risk from North America and Europe, and this could be a very strong geographical and worldwide phenomena as far as sourcing is concerned. In that sense, people talk about diversification, people talk about moving from a single source country to multi-source country to local. I think this is a debate that we'll take up in another webinar, because otherwise it will take away the whole supply chain planning into a long-term planning. Let me move ahead with the problems of the supply planning and the challenges that we faced here into understanding the other pillar of planning called demand. And I invite Srinivasan Palani from Al-Futtaim to take this question. Demand forecasting is been a very, very important tool for aligning the whole of your organization to this deterministic forecast. But in this pandemic, assumptions have changed, and as you got the glimpse of near-term and short-term approaches to planning, I would ask Srinivasan, what has been the impact on demand planning? What has been the changing assumption that has been going, and what has been, the impact on the planning processes itself? How have they planned in a retail consider around 27-26% of the total UAE GDP? It is a very significant proportion of lifeline of UAE. How has demand been managed? How has demand been sensed? How have demand planning been tuned around that, Srinivasan?
Okay, thanks, Dr. Rakesh. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Let me start with the quote from Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba Group. Okay, he always used to say, I treat myself as a blind man sitting on the back of blind tiger. The current scenario captures the same quote. Currently, the consumer behavior is like a blind tiger. That it is really unpredictable what is the demand from the consumer. And if you look at recently during the pandemic situation, suddenly there is a big spike in terms of digital sales. Even we are surprised from fashion and sports. We thought like fashion and sports will have a downtrend, but it is not the case. There was a huge demand for the dumbbells, treadmills. You don't believe we have sold it within a week during the pandemic crisis. So there is always an opportunity which is lying. But the key thing, what Dr. Rakesh is asking, how the demand forecasting is helping. We were reactive and we didn't do our level best because of the challenges what we are facing with the demand planning tools. Because if you see, my demand planning tool is like probably a black box with already configured dependent and the external variables. Everything is done, and it is also not deep diving into the subcategory, sub-square category. That is the trend now. Because I want to deep dive. I want to do a demand forecasting to the deepest of my bill of material or deepest of my master data. So there is a real need of a lean and flexibility in terms of technology. The technology has to help with the high flexibility. And currently, the planning department, we always treat the planning department as like a noodles of cacophony. This is a phrase we always say because they're confused.
We can't hear you. Srini, we can't hear you.
Hello?
Can you all hear him?
No, cannot hear Srinivasan.
Have you muted yourself?
Rakesh, can you hear us?
No. I can, anyway, I'll come back to Srinivasan by the time we fix his mic. I'll go to Kunal. And Kunal, can you explain the dynamics of demand planning, forecasting in the lockdown period in your business?
The planning changes from a month to a week, and even now it is more like a hourly planning. So just has in terms of we need to work with happening. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Now
Sorry, I lost the connection. I don't know.
Yes.
Where did I leave?
The e-commerce and changes.
Yeah, okay. So just I want to tell you, like, there are lots of unpredictable scenarios which are happening in our demand forecasting. Maybe I can give you a real-time example. One of the leading malls in Dubai, they have recently announced only the parking space can be allowed only for 30% of the existing capacity. So it has a huge benefit. It has a huge impact in terms of a sale. So these are all the external factors which we need to incorporate in our demand forecasting. Otherwise, we will end up having a huge supply but less demand. So that is the key message which I want to convey. The external variables are huge now. So we need to look at it and we need to be highly predictive. Yeah.
Yeah, Kunal, I ask you a question that how you manage your demand spikes and downward trend in the last 60 days.
And so I think coming back to the pain that I understand, Srini, what you're saying, one of the fortunate part with us in Bateel is, I was involved through and through in setting up the whole planning tool. So that black box actually is not really a black box. And fortunately, at least me and my planning team, we understand what goes inside to the bomb level. I think honestly, that has been a very, very fortunate thing in this time. So coming back to the whole demand planning model, I think George briefly mentioned that, all your statistical models at this point of time are not going to work. You need to kind of pull them apart and then put your own inputs and override every system at this point of time. So the more kind of harsh or inflexible system you have, it's going to have a major impact on you. Fortunately, because Bateel has a very, very comprehensive supply chain in terms of we are the producers, we are the farmers actually to begin with. We have our own farms. So it comes from our own farms to our own production in Saudi, then our production in UAE, and then to the consumer, finally in the FMCG environment or the retail environment. So having that access to each and every step or side of supply chain makes a huge difference in terms of managing the demand, and both the supply. So because we are the manufacturer as well as the one fulfilling the demand, so we easily could pull the plug out of production and lower it down immediately, because we knew the amount of stock, and especially with Ramadan approaching, this is the time in January, February from dates business where we stock up for like our stock is at its peak. So obviously with such a low demand, it was a biggest challenge for us to figure out what to do with our products. So the first thing we did was obviously pull the plug on the manufacturing, and we changed the way manufacturing works. We had to do a lot of workings around production in terms of how they have to work, how they have to become more agile. So if that is a different scope of business, but that had to be done in terms of readjustment, and that's how the whole demand and supply was managed, in the sense that we had to kind of reinvent the whole wheel in terms of how the planning has to be done, basically.
Yeah, Anand, you have been managing this in a big way. You have been demand planning in Dabur itself and so many organizations that I know. What are the dynamics of change that you saw during this particular period? And how has demand planning, changed for this short run or near term in order to manage the uncertainty that has unfolded now?
So from the demand side, Dr. Singh, what I saw was, there were two types of consumers that got evolved during this period. One is a consumer who is very price sensitive because of the sustainability factor, because of the job losses happening in the country, not only in the country, but in the world. So people want to keep liquid cash with them to the extent possible. So a consumer is very price sensitive. he is not going for any high brand product. If he is getting the benefit of the product at a lower price, he is buying it. That's one from the demand side which we saw. The second is a second type of consumer who is cash rich, is looking for a delivery sensitive consumer. So is how fast I can get the product into my house. So that's the second type of consumer that we saw. So the demand in the FMCG world moved from the luxury and the styling products to and the most essential products like toothpaste, shampoos, hand washes, cleaning products, sanitizers, which everyone spoke about, you know, and the essential food items, which is the staple food items which anyone wants for the day. So these were the factors which we saw in demand, and this is how we moved our category focus from the styling category products to the essential category products. So if you see in the MENA region, every other guy started manufacturing the cleaning range. You know, from facial wipes to antibacterial wipes to sprays, all the perfumery organizations who had a huge amount of, you know, the main component in the perfume is the alcohol, the industrial alcohol we go into. And sanitizer main category was also main ingredient is alcohol. So they could immediately convert these products into sanitizing products and supply into the market. So the demand in the market suddenly moved up from, you know, from 0 to about 10 times in the cleaning category. So that was one of the factors. The second was the availability for demand planning. So rather than looking at, you know, looking at how what other factors of planning rather than looking at availability as a planning as a key factor. So how fast the product is available in the market. So if our production line can produce it in next 2 days, the manufacturing or the product which is required, please deliver. So there were daily SNOPs which were kept or which are the need of the hour. So the daily SNOPs is nothing but, you know, having discussions with the distributor in the market, as in which product category the stock levels have gone down, and put that information back into the scheduling to the production line and produce that and supply that faster. So that's how demand planning evolved. It's more of a communication channel from the front end to the back end to the production line and then finally to logistics to supply. So that's what happened in the last 60 days.
George, what is your take on this? Quickly.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So just to add on to what Kunal and Anand mentioned, I think the key is one, the frequency at which now we are updating the data. So we're talking about daily, weekly. Previously, it was a much slower cycle. So which means that you're integrating fresher data as it comes. The second important point is the indicators of yesterday are probably not the same indicators of today. And the reason being that, like many of our panelists mentioned, we are seeing much stronger demand online versus offline. And that has different dynamics in terms of the product portfolio, in terms of you know, the way we understand what the demand is. So maybe we could use Google Analytics a little more, Google My Business a little more, understand the lead to deal. Understanding all of that is critical because over the past few months, online has become a much bigger portion of the business or of some businesses versus even 3 months ago, which means that we're pretty much having a digital transformation with no history to look at in terms of consumer behavior. And that's why the frequency becomes important, because you learn as you go, right? And the third part is whether this will sustain, because if you are going to say that, you know, in the future, online is the way to go for 50% of your business, then my question will be, should I invest in my retail business tomorrow? Should I invest in brick and mortar? Is that the way I want to use my capex? And those lead to a larger tactical strategic question for businesses, because the question we are asking is what consumer behaviors stick and which consumer behaviors will go away after the pandemic. And there is no crystal ball, but I think that's something that we will learn, which will influence, I would say, may not be the quantity of the demand, but the mix of the kind of products we could sell on the market, because it could be different on different channels. And those are the 2 or 3 key takeaways, of these 2 months, which also I'm understanding is clearly shared by other businesses, be it FMCG, retail, or food, because it's the same consumer in the end. And the question is, does he or she behave the same way sustainably over the long term versus what we were seeing even 6 months ago?
But George, don't you think, just a question to George, don't we think, though there is a digital transformation, but still the Middle East consumer behavior is more towards the retail. They love to visit malls. They love to, it's a mall culture in Middle East. What do you feel about it?
Yeah, I will intervene here and I will answer this, George. I think let's look at this consumer behavior a little later, and there are some changes in the consumer behavior which are going to just go away when we start reimagining our supply chain post-pandemic. There are some consumer behavior, as all of you said, including you, Srinivasan, which is going to be thought-provoking and will help you to reimagine the future supply chain. And that will come over a short run and the long run. We'll come back to that a little later also as a question. Let me bring in Guillaume. Guillaume, what has been your experience in terms of planning demand and distribution, aligning the distribution for a better supply chain during this particular period of time?
Actually, but in terms of planning and demand planning, and I think everyone could agree, even before the pandemic, meaning in the region, the Middle East, when you deal in the Middle East or you deal in Africa, anyway, the demand planning and forecast accuracy and dispersion has been always a challenge. Meaning, this pandemic has made it bigger, but it was always a challenge before. So, meaning always the question, what you are going to eat today in the evening. If you can answer that by 100%, which I'm sure not everyone can do that. So it's always been a challenge. So now, meaning there is more fluctuation of the demand. So I would say, meaning not much change from the past, except that, there is more fluctuation, but it was also the case before. So now it's always a matter of how flexible you are, meaning because we know that controlling the demand, except now with the new tools which are coming like deep learning, etc., controlling the demand is always a challenge. So the question is that you take this constraint and how agile you are in your supply chain in terms of your manufacturing capability, in terms of your distribution network, in terms of now the question is also, meaning the big question coming back is the modelization of your distribution center. So before there was a lot of consolidation done at some point, some area in the different places you used to operate. Now it's maybe so for country also, for strategy for a country, it's become more critical that no, you cannot have a distribution center which is somewhere, for example, in Eastern Europe, and try to distribute everything from there. The country might request you to have something on the ground here because it's becoming a strategy. I mean, it's a strategic decision for the country itself. So how agile you are in your distribution network, how agile you are in your manufacturing capability, how agile you are into your SKU rationalization. So these exercises, which used to be done sometimes twice in a year, once in a year, twice in a year, now maybe needs to be done every 2 months, because based on the change that you are seeing on your consumer, you can adjust your manufacturing and your distribution accordingly. So for me, it would be more about how agile is your supply chain more than how you can control your demand. We know that the demand is fluctuating. It has been fluctuating in the past. I mean, we are in the region where there have been wars. There are countries which are under embargo, etc., etc. It's happening. So how you are dealing with this is how much your supply chain is agile, and how you can adapt to the different change, more than trying to control the demand, which is going to be anyway a challenge even after coming back to a normal situation.
I think that's a fair point and very good point, Guillaume, and I think that sets the debate in a proper way. Many organizations across the globe, when we survey, we find that agility-based demand replacement is now taking a very strong, support from practitioners of supply chain across the globe. and building agility in your production and distribution is very important. I think the whole supply chain has to react to a number which is unknown, and in a very uncertainty-based supply chain, you need to build a resilient supply chain. So how would, and you rightly said production, distribution, and sourcing may change. Kunal, coming back to you, in terms of production and distribution challenges that you face because of the changing dynamics of markets, how have you gone about managing this in the next last 2 months, and what are your plans for the future?
Right. I think, yeah, I was actually coming to this earlier, but you asked the same question. See, I think Guillaume mentioned very clearly, agility is the key here. I think somebody also mentioned the frequency of now looking at the data, the amount of SNOPs we do. If I take Bateel's own example, we used to have a production planning meeting once in 2 weeks. Now we are having minimum twice a week. So automatically what is happening is because we can't control the demand, what we can control is what is in our hand is production. So we are doing that. And it's also just not the flexibility or agility that we need. I think it's a lot to do now with agility in a lot of areas, say like new product development. I think Anand mentioned, everybody who had a perfume manufacturing quickly figured out now it's the way to start doing hygiene products, whether it's sanitizers or it's liquid sprays. Similarly for us, in the date business, a major part of our business used to be selling loose dates. When you go to a supermarket, you see a lot of loose piled up dates in a corner and people buy in bulk. Now with this whole scenario, people do not want things which somebody else is touching. So obviously loose date was something which automatically went out of demand. So we quickly, our regular new product cycle is 3 months to 6 months, minimum. We quickly came up with like a bulk pack where you just pre-pack dates into a 1 kg bag, and we launched it in a market in less than 2 months. So my point, the whole point is now it's about also the innovation in the way you are going to tackle the demand. Along with, of course, the agility in the supply chain, which has always been the need. So there are a lot of other factors. One of the very, very big areas I also would like to bring up on here is, I think I think George also mentioned, or Anand, that there is a huge intervention from senior management that is required now, because the old models are not going to work. Now a human intervention in terms of my best guess is better than probably a systems guess, or a management is much more in a position to give you certainty, which is very, very difficult to find from a statistical tool. So I think these are pretty much our bigger takeaways in terms of getting agility.
Thank you, Kunal. I think that's a fair point. And I think you brought about the communication among the various functional areas and strategic input that is needed even time on a daily basis, as Anand was saying. Let me go back to Raphael. Raphael, in terms of these kind of uncertainty, how do you bring agility into the distribution network? You are a distributor for many products in UAE, and I think you have been grappling with these challenges. How do you really make your distribution more agile to the changing dynamics?
Okay, I think we need to look here at two folds, right? At two things. One is into production distribution on the floor, and the other thing is about predictable forecasting, or how you plan, right? Demand supply planning. So let's look first at the manufacturing or production distribution on the ground. What is very important and will support agility is scalability. In the future, scalable solution combined with automation will be a key enabler to create the mentioned agility. But agility normally goes with cost, with OPEX. And I think nobody wants to bear additional OPEX. So how you do this? Through scalable, automated solutions that will adjust to your demand and can be sized to your demand, will reduce your OPEX, as you can take out one of the main factors in such an environment here is compared to Europe is the amount of people, it's quantity of people, right? In Europe, you have highly skilled people. Here, you have less skilled people, but you have a bigger amount of people, right? So you need to find the balance there. But still, to plan your scalability, to utilize your assets, to reduce your OpEx, you need to think how I plan, how I forecast. And this is the next step. We need to look into it. I think predictable forecasting, this is the future where we need to go. And this is exactly playing a major role in our future. We need to build on big data. We need to collect, we need to understand, and then we need to apply this understanding into our production and distribution to optimize our assets. Is this answering the question?
Yes, that's very good. Srini, I think this is very interesting, and you were talking about predictability earlier when you lost your voice. Here, what do you think are the major driver of business that planning team needs to take into account, given that there are so many suggestions, even in terms of retail, both fashion, sports, and essentials? When you go forward into return to the normal, when you start reimagining your supply chain, what is that you think should be taken into account while going ahead?
So so going ahead, I would say for the planning, we need to currently the vast KPI performance metrics, everything is being eroded off. As per me, for supply chain, it is on time in full quantity, that KPI. But for planning, there is a new KPI which we are suggesting, which is net promoter score, which is nothing but the feedback which we get from the customer buying behavior. So planning plays a huge role in ensuring the net promoter score for the customer, which means we satisfy in terms of supply and demand to the customer's expectation. So this is a key driver which we need to look at in terms of KPI perspective. And as Raphael has highlighted clearly, we need to embed the preventive approach in the planning in such a way I would say this collaboration approach. What is that? IBP. This collaboration of the planning is a key. They have to spend more time in discussing with buyers, merchandisers, your last mile leg, even to the sourcing, and they need to have a more different types of skill sets rather than the statistical skill sets. That is my takeaway.
Thank you, Srini, and I think we see a lot of emphasis what Raphael put on automation and big data. I think pre-crisis there has been a very strong move. I think you said black box, Kunal said black box. I don't know, the APUs of the past were built on certain algorithm that did not really, was capable of taking into account. There are propagatory frameworks today. People are saying that we have a connected planning with SaaS solutions which can be in the cloud, which can actually integrate your last miles from both the sides, from the last tire of your supplier to your last distributor or retailer. How does technology plays a big role? How does connecting everything, putting sensor everywhere, automating everything, analyzing everything, and creating a supply chain which is seamless, and it's like a vertical tower. I have the information everywhere. How is this disruptive technologies, which were called disruptive, now the word disruptive is moved away, they're called digital technologies in the literature, going to help supply chain planning in a big way? So Anand, let me start with you. You've been quiet for some time. We can't hear you. You are on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So, as I was also saying earlier, the key today from technology or from communication perspective is align your key distributors in the region. Let's say that you have, fortnightly SNOPs with your distributor. Make your distributors cash flow also one of your responsibility so that at the end of it, both the organizations are doing business together. So one is you maintain your cash flows with your vendors, and also you maintain cash flows with the distributor. At the end of it, if he sells, he gets the money, he pays it to you, and you pay it back to the vendors. That's how the profit happens across the chain. So unless you do not align the supply chain guys of your distributor and in terms of what the movement of inventory is, how the movement of inventory is, what is the category that is moving, and hence do the scheduling calls with your production lines, as what Kunal was mentioning, that twice a week. I would say it was almost every day basis, schedule the lines for the next 2 days and change the production lines in such a way that what you're producing is actually getting out of your warehouse rather than sitting in your warehouse. So that's the way communication is the key.
Thank you. I think, George, what do you think the role technology plays in a global supply chain, that the kind that you have?
I think
during the crisis, how does it help make supply chain more resilient? We have a very philosophical take on technology and seamlessness, but how does it make it more resilient for a global supply chain like you?
So one of the big things I'm really pushing at the moment, that I'm accelerating further with the crisis, is taking data-driven decisions and analytics, because I think data can tell us a lot of things and can help us see things before they actually happen. So you could see trends across the supply chain. That's something that Srinivasan also adhered to, talking about starting from the customer. So the minute you start understanding what's happening with your customer, how is he selling to his end consumer if it's a dealer, or how are you selling directly to your end consumer? Are they changing behaviors? You start understanding or start seeing a little more, I would say, gray versus black.
Right. I think go ahead.
Second part is then what can you learn from that data? And there's a lot of AI, machine learning, and all of that around that. So that's one part of the business coming from supply chain. But I always believe supply chain is very, very closely linked to business performance. And that's where we are starting to engage actually much more closely with many of our key customers to understand their markets, but also to help them optimize their supply chain. Because like Anand mentioned, their survival is your success. And sometimes we can help them see stuff that they are not equipped to see because they may not have the right tools or the right bandwidth to invest in those kind of tools. So it's
right,
two things.
I think that's
changes and how you can help your consumers.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Let me go to Raphael once again. And Raphael, can you give your views on technology, and what do you see the role of technology in future, as you really talked about a little while ago?
Okay. I think technology moving forward is the key enabler for effective and efficient supply chain. And again, I think we need to look a little at different parts here. If we look at the moving part of products, at the flows of information, I think that one of the key enablers of the technology is a little bit a bleeding word at the moment is blockchain. But blockchain is here to stay, and it will impact up and downstream logistics, supply chains, and make transactions instantly available to everybody that's needed. That's one. If we now take big data and connect with blockchain, we get absolute transparency, and we can start using big data for predictable forecasting. This will enable us to reduce waste, to be effective, lean, from source to the end. So no silos anymore. And this is where we need to go. We need to connect. We need to start connecting the different technologies together in supply chain. We need to go a step forward. Not only the technologies, the mindset, the people need to change. I mean, if you look at WMS systems, how many have WMS systems using day for day? but they still do every year one big count. Instead of doing a rolling count through the years, they would be absolutely able with a WMS system. So technology doesn't enable you to using it, right? And this will build the fundament for your future to connect these technologies together, to increase the skills of your people, and all this together will create a transformation as a distributor, as a supply chain organization, or broadly in any industry. This needs to happen in the next couple of years, months, weeks. So the direction is very clear.
Srinivasan, I think, what do you think of one basic element that would define the supply chain in the future? One take, quickly, because we are running out of time, so we'll take everyone's opinion on one direction. One thing that you think will define and this will restructure the supply chain in future, or will define the supply chain of future?
I am in favor of 100% push model. In such a way, the actual demand is being communicated through your EDA interface to all the vendors, sub-vendors, which will avoid my inventory. There will be a demand-based supply chain economy in the future.
But when you talk about a DDMRP approach like this, obviously your decoupling point is the volume frequency at the end of it, which determines your inventory, and obviously you need some forecast in that case. Otherwise, you need to align whole of your production capacity and suppliers in a big way, and big challenge is the inventory. I'm just making a critique of that, but I think everyone has moved to this in a very near and short run. Kunal, what is your take on this?
Specifically,
What is one
that
thing will help us to rebuild the supply chain back to normal and drive the businesses in a normal way?
I think coming back to my previous point, I think there is a lot of management intervention required. I think supply chain has, if anything, become, now everybody is realizing how strategic this function is. And unless, like I think Anand or somebody mentioned, it is literally right down from the CEO. I mean, if who can predict our next year budget? I mean, tell me, is it a job of a supply chain planner? Is it my job? I mean, is it your job or anybody else's job? Can I imagine that the demand next year is going to drop 30% and plan? So my whole take is this function becoming strategic and becoming so close to management, because I am pushing now for 21 budget, right? For me to plan, how do I take my supply chain on? And if anything, this is, I think, the future, that at least you will see more of supply chain sitting in board meetings. You will see more of supply chain going more frequent meetings and visits with the management, with the leadership team, and figuring out that yes, we need to sit in when you are planning, otherwise it can make or break companies. That's my take on it.
Thank you, Kunal. I'll go to Guillaume. Guillaume, what do you think would be one thing that would help us, rebuild our supply chains of future?
One thing is that I will not talk about tool, because the tool are there, but definitely most faster and data interchange and data upload, and that's one thing. As you said, the monthly type of SNOP might need to become more frequent, so that and here I'm not talking about, again, I'm not talking about, but I'm talking about processes where people are coming together, and coming back on Kunal point, where supply chain is sitting with the sales, with the finance, and with the marketing more often, so that the company can be more agile, because my point is to be more agile. So that's
agility again is consensus here. George, you have already given your point, this point. So anything else that you want to put?
No, the only thing I would add is something from a people perspective, and that's trust. So I think there's a lot more dependability on supply chain. Through this crisis, as supply chain leaders, we need to build trust that we will be able to steer the business out of this and into the future, which means that we move away in terms of how we position ourselves as executors and move into more of a consultant role for your CEO, which is a very, very different role because we are pretty much the eyes and the ears on the market today. We deliver to our customers, we deliver to our customers' customers. So sometimes we can see the market changes much faster than what a marketing or the others could see who are not that much connected to the ground.
All right, thank you. I think Anand.
To me, I say that supply chain to be in future part of all the secondary review discussions which happen between sales and marketing, so that information actually will help in scheduling the production lines in the backend. So that's one of my key takeaways.
Raphael, you already said this, but you have anything to comment on?
Yes, I would like to highlight one point, even though it sounds a little bit as a paradox, but I think what made me very happy about this crisis, it shows, number one, always is people speaking to people. That's number one. That's the most important connection between people, aligning on processes, speaking, connecting. That's number one. And what we learn out of this is we need to create a synergy between technology and people. This needs to go forward. This needs to be pushed. And the crisis or the COVID situation exactly highlighted this situation and put the spotlight on it. And I think this will give a boost into supply chain, and money will be spoken. CapEx will be made free to invest further in supply chain, to boost technology and bringing forward the supply chain to the position where it should be as a critical backbone of creating wealth, growth, and customer service to the market and to organization.
That's very good. I think we have come to the end of the discussion, and we'll move to the question answer session. And I think it's very interesting to see that the whole question of people talking to each other, communicating and collaborating is very important element of managing event disruptions. And IBP review, which is become a very critical framework, where you review your demand, you review your supply, you review your product portfolio, and I think you do financial and management reconciliation with your logistics and sourcing data and sustainability into it, is going to define, as far as I can see, the future of supply chain planning in this particular world as a whole. And technology can be a great enabler, as all of you have said, but yes, it is a people issue. Second thing is that I think we need to talk about supply chain skills, supply chain planning skills in the domain of this uncertainty, how they need to change, how supply chain needs to rebuild its capability in the future, because while we are seeing that we are converging towards a different paradigm and some new paradigm, we are not talking about skilling our workforce. Third, I think the human face of supply chain will be very, very, very important in planning, as well as sustainability will be very important in planning. So let's move to the question answer sessions. And there is a question: how can we protect our supply chain from uncertainties, political and geopolitical risk? This is by Yassir Rizvi. And I think, does anyone want to take this? Anand?
Sorry, Rakesh, can you repeat that, please?
How can we protect our supply chain from uncertainties like political and geopolitical risk?
So, the supply chain, when I say, let's say the inventory to begin with, yeah. So I feel that all the shorter lead times items to be on lean inventory, similar to what JIT is all about. And for the longer ones, cover up the inventory to a longer period because they are imported, because of the longer lead time items, and also increase the credit period with the vendors. So be business partners rather than business associates, and that's the approach I think we should go.
I think, Dr. Singh, if I can add, I think, sorry, yeah, I think I'd come back to Ghulam Ali's point here, because he kind of started on the same note that this region is so prone to a lot of disturbances, whether it's political, geopolitical, even war related. I don't think you can have a supply chain which can be fully. You cannot control these parameters because they are external. I think the only thing we can do is include and kind of become more and more agile overall to take care of this. I mean, these external factors we cannot control within the region. I think what we can control again internally is create more agility within the supply chain to manage this rather than trying to control an external factor. So that would be my take on this.
Yeah, absolutely, Kunal. In fact, I also agree to what you're saying because these are all external and they are
Exactly. We can't
cannot
control
be
much, but we
influential by,
should be able to bounce. Yeah, absolutely.
it cannot be influential by anyone because these are all factors which are
Even what we are going through today, for that matter. I mean, this who could have predicted or be prepared for what we are going through, right? But we are all managing, thankfully, which is a good part. Yeah.
But Kunal and Anand, I have a little question on this. We know that political uncertainty and disruption in Arab region has been quite ongoing. There could be some understanding from what people call it as news analysis and getting information and interpreting this and getting and predicting these information. So Gulame, do you have to say something on this?
That's the meaning. Those external factors, I will not say the only way, but one thing is that you're working with partner, you're working with distributor, with customer who are in those countries who normally they have the heads up on what is going to happen. For example, typical example, there is a shoe cover ban in India. If you want to buy a shoe cover from India and if you have your supplier in India, it's banned by the government because of the situation. Now this ban came, it didn't come all of a sudden, meaning the supplier they had some heads up about this. So okay, try to anticipate. But my point here is that the communication. So when there is a war in the country, when there is an embargo coming, meaning your distributor, your customer who is in the country because you're working with partner in the country, they are having the heads up on what is going to happen in the short period. So you take this information and try to anticipate and try to build stock if you need, to send some other good, to find some other solution if you need, because sometimes it's a money transfer. You cannot transfer directly the money from one country to another country. So your distributor has to find a solution through a third party, etc. So, but here again, it comes back to the communication because you cannot control the factor, but at least you can try to get the information as fast as possible and as much in advance as possible from the people who are on the ground.
Thank you, Guillaume. I think the next question goes to Srinivasan. Freshness requirements are stringent for e-commerce and modern trade compared to general trade. At the same time, customers are moving more to e-commerce post-COVID-19. How are FMCGs maintain product freshness in this scenario, especially for the stock both 6 months down the line?
Yeah, this is the question of the hour. Yeah, this is actually quite a challenging scenario now. In order to ensure a newness of the stock, always we look at the sale pattern and maybe I can give you a real-time scenario in terms of FMCG, probably your sanitizers, all the hygiene stuffs are selling well. So we need to just focus on that particular category, subcategory level, and we need to focus the demand and communicate to the vendors. And obviously, for the newness of the stock, maybe Anand somewhere he mentioned previously, we need to park inventory for that, in spite of the risk of managing the inventory.
George, there is a question to you.
I think, Dr. Singh, if I can just add, see, there is actually a positive side to the whole e-commerce.
Louder, Kunal, you're not being heard.
Yeah. Sorry. Hi. Is it better?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just saying that there is actually an upside of the whole e-commerce and the freshness of product. I mean, I'm again talking from food perspective, where freshness is more relevant. So I would say in e-commerce, what happens? You are actually between the manufacturer and the end consumer, there are no more channels. right? So there is the probability of you deciding and getting a fresh product to your end consumer is actually much higher in e-commerce. So, somewhere it is also an advantage from an e-commerce perspective and a freshness perspective that I personally within Bateel, we make sure that a product, when it is ordered by the consumer today, it's packed today itself and delivered tomorrow. So you understand the amount of freshness is much greater than somewhere it is sitting in one of the boutiques and somebody buying it after a few weeks. So it is also upside to it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Kunal. George, do you see a need to move storage points closer to your markets to respond quickly to the post-COVID scenario while maintaining flexibility to change markets if required? There are questions from Nile Desmukh. George.
So it really depends on what the customer trends are, and very different depending on the kind of markets we operate. So we could decide certain products to bring them much closer to the customer. For others, we could decide to remain as is. And for still others, we could decide to take some risk on where we stock. And that really depends on what is the kind of demand we are seeing pulling forward. And then looking at the more strategic or tactical horizon, the questions we are asking ourselves is what is the right balance between a global sourcing and a more local to local sourcing? Because in the end, anything you're doing which is not linked to your strategy in terms of sourcing is going to cost you in terms of stock. So we could do that in the short term, but then the bigger question around here is how much do we need to do focused on local to local versus global supply chain management, which opens another Pandora box of questions saying, is the global supply chain the future we should go with based on what we've learned here? Or is it something, that's going to be focused more on local to local, and we reverse part of the globalization that has happened in the world today on the supply chain side at least?
Thank you, George. And the next question is for Anand Doraiswamy. Can you take us through the challenges Dabur faced and the learning for the company in terms of the demand surge for sanitizers, the product Dabur has? Quickly, Anand, because it's a story and a case study, so be short and sweet for this.
Yeah, I think I can go on this topic, but quickly, as I said that we adapted the strategy of localization, which is basically we have a raw and the packing material. Packing materials were all local, so the lead times were shorter than a week to manufacture, and that's how we could provide the products onto the shelf, and that was very quick. In terms of the raw materials, most of the raw materials were in the basket because we are in the FMCG world, and there's a lot of common raw materials which we use in the product, except for the main ingredient, which was alcohol, and also which was sourced. So at the end of it, the entire new product development was developed within 20 days. So that's the speed that the entire company went into. All the departments came in together. We had a daily meeting in morning 9 o'clock where all the key stakeholders were involved and decisions were taken. So the agility was the key here, and within 20 days we could launch the product in the market.
All right, thank you, Anand. And the next question is to Raphael. Raphael, has any one of you changed or increased their digitalization effort in order to remain more competitive? Have you increased your technology and digitalization efforts in order to remain more competitive during the pandemic? There's a question from Lorenzo for Nalu.
Okay, we didn't start during, we started already before. So this transformation is a long-term process, it's a strategy, it's organization. I think it's more highlighted on a global scale and it's more focused on it. But this is a topic supply chain should think about and act and have strategies developed already prior COVID. It's just now being focused. Yes, there are plans, there are projects, and they are not directly linked to the situation now. They are just fostered and speeded up, accelerated, right?
All right, thank you. I think this is a common question in any webinar that you will have now. And this question is, do the panelists see a shift in procurement and manufacturing hubs away from China? And which are the reasons worldwide that can fill the gap? This question is from Anaita. So I think any one of you can take it, the first come first take is not mention the panelist.
I think I'll start. I mean, honestly, I'd love to. Yeah, sorry. I'm saying I'd love to say that yes, diversification is the key. Let's all, go to all the possible countries. But, ultimately, all of us are running businesses and there is a cost of element, COGS involved. So, whatever said and done, I think even within this time, China was the first country hit and China was the first country out. So, I mean, I definitely say that even as a supply chain professional, my strategy would be focusing on diversifying, but I think it is very relevant to businesses and you can do it obviously keeping some costs in mind. I mean, how many of us can say that we'll shift our manufacturing product buying from China overnight to Europe? I mean, there is a huge cost element, right? So as much as we'd like to do that, I think there has to be other factors considering, but diversification should be definitely on cards. But it's more like a long-term play game, I would say, rather than a short-term thing. Yeah.
Also, just to add, there are two main factors on a decision of buying. One is cost and second is service. So this logic always remains, irrespective of what the pandemic, post-pandemic. So it's a case-to-case decision that a company or an industry or a product which has been sourced. If both the factors are met, and if it's still China, then let it be China. Or if it is some other country, let it be some other country. That's the decision that the management has to take.
All right, I think we have come to the end. It's 1.5 hours now. And to summarize, let me start with sourcing itself. I think single sourcing has seemed to be a major issue of concern in the history in the last 10 years with so many natural calamities. There has been an attempt to move from single sourcing to multiple sourcing, because even within single sourcing, when people are looking at option, then the option is again China. And I think what George said earlier, the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, you find that there's a tier 7, which is the major problem, and you can't even crack it in such a situation. Second thing is that I think there are large number of competitive regions that have come about, like Brazil, India, Vietnam, even Bangladesh. There would be some diversification given the kind of pandemic and the politics of the pandemic. And there is going to be a localization. I think even in UAE, I've been reading through, Kunal was telling me last time in one of the webinars, that there would be a localization of very essential products which are not very hard to replicate and bring it in. So I think China will remain, and it has the economies of scale, but given the kind of nature and pandemic and disruption that are there, global supply chains, there is a reshoring that's happening for the last 7 years, and it's picking up in a big way. Technology like 3Ds are also aiding this kind of reshoring. So I think this is going to be a reality. On the planning front, I think one of the best way to look at it is that all of you have been having near and short-term approaches, but I think you are building smaller scenarios of that near and short-term. What about a long-term scenario building, taking into account the risks that can come up, and building your sensitivity analysis around the scenarios would be a big challenge. And third, I think organizations talk about SNOP. I can tell you a funny story that we work for an organization in India, a conglomerate, and we were helping with their SNOP. And then suddenly we realized that they have an SNOP process, and Anand, they also have a dynamic SNOP process. And all of you know what that dynamic comes from, and that comes from the marketing. If it's largely marketing driven dynamic processes, you lose the sense of communication. I think we need to move towards product review, we need to move towards demand review, logistics review, product procurement review, and also financial and managerial reconciliation, as George largely said about cash is a king. But at the end of the day, there has to be a governance, a number of IPP holds through. And in the short run, it is integrated, tactical planning that all of us are doing. Is we are not doing an NSNP. We are doing integrated tactical planning, and that is a very important way of building the IBP for reimagining the supply chain of future. I thank Anand, I thank Guillaume, I thank Kunal, I thank Raphael, I thank Srinivasan, I thank George, and all the audience that is a good audience that we have had. So thank you for supporting us for the first webinar series. and hope to see you all with a lot of knowledge series that ISCM intends to bring to the region, Dubai and Gulf as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh,
Thank you, Kunal.
and all the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Raj.
Bye-bye.